Thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm Brittany Wilmes here with Faith and Money Network. I'm also joined by Kim Montral and Jonathan Welle from Cleveland Owns. Again, if you didn't hear us, we'll be muted, but using the chat tonight. So feel free to chime in and tell us where you're calling in from. And also feel free to use the chat throughout Jonathan's presentation for questions. We will have time for Q&A toward the end of the session here. As we get started, I'm going to share just a few slides on Faith and Money Network happenings. So welcome on behalf of Faith and Money Network. If you are not familiar, we're happy you're here. Faith and Money Network is a nonprofit ministry based in Washington, D.C. And our goal really is starting at the individual level to encourage people to think deeply about their money habits, and feelings around money as they have come into conjunction with values, whether that's Christian background, faith-based background, or just personal values. We do that through a number of ways. We have online courses, including our Money, Faith, and You class, which takes place a few times a year. The next of our Money, Faith, and You classes will start in the fall. That's a Zoom course, which we'll send you more info on after this call. And we also have our got a notification. Our household practices covenant groups. These are based on Sabbath economics, which you're likely familiar with if you're on this call. This is a Zoom course as well that takes place over 8 months and meets once a month for about 2 hours each month. We look at each of these tenets of Sabbath economics, and folks in these small groups really dive deep into study, supplemented with things like podcasts and articles, and then also taking on some personal commitments to really put some of this into practice in your own life. So if you're interested in this group, we will be hosting the next round of this starting in June. So stay tuned for more on that. And if you want to learn more, just a quick reminder that Faith and Money Network is at faithandmoneyNetwork.org, and then Cleveland Owns, which you're about to hear much more about, can be found at clevelandowns.coop. So that's it for my slides. If you have any questions on tech or anything else, feel free to drop it in the chat. And I will turn it over to Kim Montral to introduce Jonathan.
Thank you, Brittany, and welcome everyone. It's total joy to have each person here. We think of all the circles of people that each one here is connected with and the deep work that you're doing, and really excited, Jonathan, for your sharing tonight and what you will say and what you embody, and a little bio that I'm sure just touches the surface of Jonathan, but Jonathan is the lead organizer with Cleveland Owns, where he works to show, not tell, ways to organize our economy in more democratic ways through worker ownership, community ownership, and community decision-making. His childhood as a pastor's kid planted the seed of his belief in the power of community. And Jonathan's focus on economic power developed while supporting grassroots co-ops in the Dominican Republic and Peru as a volunteer in the Peace Corps, and became more urgent in his later work at McKinsey & Company. Over the past few years, after studying Sabbath economics, Jonathan has been learning to integrate his Christian faith and his economic democracy work. And Jonathan lives in Cleveland with his partner, Molly. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Brittany. Pleasure to be with y'all tonight. Really glad to have got this chance as we get started. A question I have for you is, if you have questions, I actually want to suggest that you go ahead and pre-populate any questions you've got in the chat, so those can kind of keep going throughout the conversation. Appreciate you sending welcomes in the chat and where you're calling from. That's great to see, especially so many Midwestern folks. Glad to see folks from across the country here. I want to start with a story, which is back in 2021, I had just started dating my now partner, Molly. And I went to join her for dinner at the Cleveland Catholic Worker, where she was a member. The Cleveland Catholic Worker is part of an international movement you may be familiar, called the Catholic Worker, which has been around since the 1930s. And in Cleveland, there's been a consistent community for about 40 years, and they have a small house on a street not far from where I was living at the time. in a walkable neighborhood that's gentrifying quickly. And so one night I walk over to meet Molly for dinner, and the house looks a little forlorn. You know, it's loved. It's a nice house, but a little forlorn. There's chipping paint some places. And if you walk up the front steps, they have a bit of a give to them. So I bounce my way up these steps, and inside I see a long table with about 15 place settings of various mismatched styles. And in the kitchen, some folks are cooking. And as I'm waiting for Molly to arrive, I start chatting with a friend of mine who's a community member who I knew a little bit. And then while we were chatting, someone brought out a pot of rice and beans, and it was a pretty small pot. And I remember kind of looking at the pot and looking at the 15 place settings, then looking at my friend and then looking back at the pot. And I'm doing some quick math in my head. And I lean over to my friend and I say, you know, this food looks great. It smells amazing, but I'm not sure there's going to be enough. And my friend didn't miss a beat. Without pausing, she said, Jonathan, there's always enough. And I really didn't know what she meant. But I was the new guy around the Catholic worker. So I just went with it and I sat down, and Molly arrived and the whole crew sits down at this big table. The table's full. I get my little serving of rice and beans. And by the time I'd finished that, someone brings out a big platter of toast for everyone. And then shortly after that, someone else brings out dessert, like a pound cake that someone's family had donated. And by the end, I wasn't stuffed, but sure enough, you know, I was full enough. And what I didn't know then was that off the kitchen, there is actually a room stocked with canned goods, with dried rice, with other staples. So in a literal sense, my friend that night was right. There is enough. But what I didn't understand also when I walked in was that the Catholic worker is something different. The Catholic worker has a shared understanding and a set of shared material resources that together say that within this space, that there is enough for everyone. And frankly, that's countercultural. You know, maybe I don't need to tell you, but here's a quick moment about how that's countercultural. On the first day of my economics class in grad school, they told me that economics, and I'm going to need your help to fill in this blank. So in the chat, fill this blank. Economics is the study of blank. This is a mainstream idea of what the study of economics is all about. I wonder if there's anybody on this call who can help me fill in this blank. Economics is the study of blank. Scarcity. Mary Ellen, Brian. Gosh, thank you. Yes, scarcity. And certainly our dominant economic system is premised on scarcity. It's premised on enclosure. It's premised on dispossession, premised on accumulation. And in practice, what that means in our modern economy, that looks like taking resources that have been held in common or could be held in common and privatizing them. It looks like signs that say no trespassing. It looks like oil pipelines across native land. It looks like immigration raids and border walls. And in this sea of extraction, what I saw that night from my friend at the Catholic worker is what I'm going to call a little island of common resources. A shared house, a shared kitchen, a shared meal, common resources stewarded in this way for 40 years, as long as I'd been alive here in Cleveland. And when I walked into this island of common resources, it clashed the logic that I had grown up with, the assumptions that I had about scarcity, and a reflex to worry that there wouldn't be enough. And my friend put me at ease that night. You know, she offered a hopeful view of how we'd make dinner work. And she offered me a way out of that anxiety that I felt. And so the Catholic worker, this island of common resources, tonight I'm going to share how I think it's part of what I would call the solidarity economy. A vision for an economic system transformed, a vision where people have their needs met. We meet those needs while respecting the limits of the natural world. Experiencing that night was an important moment for me at the Catholic worker. And I want to relate that experience to the work I do day to day, starting co-ops at Cleveland Owns. I see lessons between what I learned that night and the work we're trying to do, this small nonprofit that I work at, where our goal is to create similar spaces, small but meaningful, let's call them islands of common resources that run counter to this dominant logic of scarcity at the heart of capitalism. In these places, by design, we hope that they are places where there is, in fact, enough for everyone. And that's part of what makes co-ops so compelling to me, because they are practical. I think they can be powerful examples of how we revive lost traditions of commoning. Commoning meaning the ways of organizing resources and community that sustained people for hundreds of years, thousands of years, before the intensification of extraction and dispossession began around, let's say, 1500s in Europe. And frankly, since then, that historical process hasn't stopped. Extraction and dispossession today define the present moment, shapes the background of anxiety and the tension that I carried into my conversation that night at the Catholic Worker. It's a feeling that there isn't enough and that the bottom might drop out at any moment. So co-ops and the Catholic Worker are different from that in some ways that are meaningful. They are different from each other also in substantial ways. They point towards, I think, the same direction. They suggest it's possible to step outside the scarcity mindset, even if only in small pockets for now, and that it's possible to cultivate something else, which is a sense of abundance, a sense that for everyone, in every place, there is, in fact, enough. As we get started, I want to invite you to join me in a little bit of a guided experience here. So if you are for it, I'm going to share my screen. And we're going to try this guided meditation where we actually explore what it looks like to experience the world as it could be together. Give me just 1 second here. I'm going to share my screen. So if you're seated, I invite you to feel the weight of your seat beneath you, and to feel comfortable. If you're able to close your eyes, I invite you to do that too. Let's just take a couple of deep breaths together. Take a big breath in together. And a big breath out. If you've had a busy day, you can use this time to just slow down. Big breath in. Pray if you'd like. Big breath out. In. Out. Go ahead and keep breathing at your own pace. If you'd like to keep your eyes closed, I invite you to do that. Let's imagine what you see when you imagine a just, sustainable world. That world in this vision, that world exists, and you're already there. As you take your next slow breath, tell me, what can you smell? What can you hear? Now imagine you're walking. What do you feel beneath your feet? Do you feel asphalt? Do you feel a wooded path or bare earth? Go ahead and open your mind's eye and scan the scene in front of you. So what do you see while you're walking? You see bicycles, you see gardens, you see greenery. What type of buildings do you see? Are they made out of brick or wood, dome? Are they dome or are they square shaped? Are there parks around you? What do those parks look like? Who's using them? And who are the other people around you? Do they feel familiar? What are they doing? Say you're starting now to arrive at your destination, your mind's eye. What have you come here to do? Have you come here to play, socialize, to visit, to volunteer, to vote, to shop, to work? Take one more breath together. And as you start to bring your attention back to forward in the current moment, I want to invite you to reflect on some of the values that were present in the world that we just experienced together. And in fact, in the chat, as you bring your attention back, I want us to take 15 seconds of silence. And in the chat, I invite you to type a word or a phrase about the emotions that you felt as you explored this world as it should be. But don't press enter yet. We're going to press enter together. So go ahead and type a word or phrase about the emotions you felt as you explored the world as it should be. Don't press enter. Do that in just a few seconds. So I'll be quiet while folks type if you're up for it. And don't press enter yet. We'll do that in just a second. Okay. Another second to type a word or phrase about how you felt. And on 3, we'll press enter together. So 1, 2, 3. Yeah, thanks everyone. Okay, I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, let's see. Kim, radical hospitality. Andy says joyful trust. Donna, delight. Marissa, grounded. Mark, relaxed, joyful. Mark, Joel said at peace. Diane said joy, freedom, grounded. Thanks y'all for sharing that. I appreciate that. It's helpful to hear what comes up for folks in the world as it could be. Now I want to invite you to shift gears. This might be a slightly more taxing exercise to think about the world as it is, the world that we currently live in, and specifically the economic system as it is right now. And to do the same exercise, maybe meditate for a second and think about a word or phrase comes up for you when you think about the world as it is. Maybe an emotion that you feel, and type it, but don't press enter. We'll do the waterfall again. So the world as it is, what emotions come up for you when you think about that, particularly when you think about the economic component of the world today. So go ahead and type that, but don't press enter. We'll do that together. Yeah. We have a few seconds here to do that. Okay, let's go ahead and press enter on 3. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, thanks y'all. So here, and yeah, lots of very different tone: grief, anxious, tension, exhausting, stretched, complex, chaos, wary, cautious, grinding, poverty, anxious, pressured, pleaded. Thanks for sharing. Accessing that is not easier to ask someone to access it than to actually go there yourself. And I appreciate you sharing. There's a whole host of stories in each of the words that you just typed, both on the what you saw in the world as it could be and in what you reflected on when you considered the world as it is. Thank you for going there with me and participating in this little activity. I think the contrast is clear. We can imagine a better world. And in the reality of where we are right now, we are feeling the weight of an unjust system in many ways and in complex ways. And that has a tangible impact in anxious, in soul-sucking, in cautious, in the ways that I heard folks describe. That's a very real place that we're starting from. And so I think the goal today that I'm hoping to share more about is, what does it look like to explore that alternative and begin to find seeds for that future that we can plant together? And so to that end, I want to share a presentation. I'll share my screen again and start with some context for what it could look like to build that together. Let me go ahead and share my screen and start a presentation which is really focused on some concrete stuff. We're going to talk about cooperatives, and we're going to talk about this big picture idea of the solidarity economy. I want to share some specific examples of co-ops that we're building in Cleveland, tell you more about what motivates me, what's my why, and to share more about the theory of change for what we think it really takes concretely to build a new economy. During this time, I probably won't have access to the chat. So if you put something in the chat, I'd love to address it, but it might take me a minute. So, okay, so really concretely, this is the definition of what a co-op business is. I'll read it. It's a co-op is an autonomous association of people united voluntarily to meet a common economic, social, cultural need and or aspiration through a jointly owned, democratically controlled enterprise. In short, y'all, it's a business that serves its members. So it doesn't need to be a complex concept. It's also all these other things, which is where it does get a little more complex. It is at one time a legal structure, a legal entity, a tax category, and it's also a set of principles. And so the purest form of a co-op might hit all those things. Many things that are operating cooperatively and can even be described as co-ops actually might not check all those boxes. It is and should be member-owned, member-controlled, and member-benefiting. So I bet y'all are not new to this idea of a co-op. In fact, I bet y'all know a lot of co-ops. And so I wonder if we could go back to the chat for 1 second and type in the chat the name of some co-ops that you're familiar with. And you can just go ahead and press enter right when you type it. What are some of the co-ops that you do know? I'm guessing we know a lot of them. So go ahead and type in the chat co-ops that you're familiar with. Yes, okay, we got Rust Belt Riders, we got Overland Student Cooperative Association, we got Willie Street, King Arthur Flour, Ocean Spray, thanks y'all, Mondragon, great in Spain, Equal Exchange, People's Food Co-op, Rico Resource Center, Equal Exchange, Food Front, yep, okay, so keep them coming. This is great. This is a great list of co-ops. I don't know all of these. I know a lot of them. Bob's Mill, sure enough. And the point is that we know a lot of co-ops, and in fact, they're already part of our world. This is not a new idea. Let's look at what kinds of co-ops there are and some examples of them. So here we go. We've got 5 types of co-ops, and I see other folks continue to bring in co-ops in the chat. That's welcome. Consumer, purchasing, producer, worker, and multi-stakeholder. Quickly, I'm going to describe what these categories are and how they differ from one another. Consumer, these are individual people, consumers who have a need, who aggregate their need and find a common way to meet that need. And a great example is a credit union. I believe 100 million Americans are members of a credit union. It's a very large number. A credit union, sure enough, the consumers are the bankers, or rather the people who bank there. Their need is for financial services, place to get a loan, place to put their checking account, savings account, have a debit card. So I'm a member of a credit union. I imagine many of you are. Another example is a rural electric co-op. These were started roughly in the 1930s. Here's the one closest to me in Cleveland, the Lorraine Medina Rural Electric Co-op. These are consumers, are individual households or small businesses who need electric services. They need to get connected to an electric grid. And they actually own that business. And some 40% of the land mass of America is covered by a rural electric co-op. So these are literally all around us. A purchasing co-op is when the same principle, but the purchasers are institutions. So rather than individual people, you're talking about businesses and nonprofits. Great example is Ace Hardware. These are hardware stores that, to my understanding, aggregate their spending power to buy supplies for those stores in bulk. Another one is Power Up Purchasing Co-op, which we're going to spend some time talking about later. In Power Up Purchasing Co-op, it's nonprofits that aggregate their spending power to buy the facilities management goods and services that they need to manage the facilities that they operate in. So Power Up is based in Ohio. We're incubating this one, so I've got a special attachment to Power Up. It's based on CPA Co-op in DC, which has a great history with Church of the Savior, which I believe is a faith and money connection. And together in DC, folks spent $40 million on the things that they bought together collectively. A producer co-op is the same idea, but in reverse. It's producers who want to sell something. In Minnesota and Wisconsin, there are a bunch of cherry farmers who have bogs. And rather than each individual farm sell those cherries under their own brand, they actually got together and started a brand that they own collectively called Ocean Spray. Worker co-ops are another category. Equal exchange got mentioned. Rust Belt Riders here in Cleveland. Examples of where the members of the co-op are the actual workers who day to day punch in and make the business happen. And then a multi-stakeholder co-op is where you combine any more than one of those elements. Gem City Market is a food store in Dayton. It is owned by its shoppers, so the consumers. So it would be a consumer co-op. And it also allows a share of ownership for the workers. So in that sense, it is a consumer and worker co-op. So it gets the multi-stakeholder co-op category. It's an awesome place. If you're ever in Dayton, it's built in the zone of food apartheid. Done an amazing thing as it's blossomed. Okay, so that's the big picture view of what they are. Let's talk about like how that has shown up, what that looks like in America. According to the National Cooperative Business Association, 65,000 cooperative businesses. A third of Americans are owners of a co-op, and they have, a tremendous number of assets, $3 trillion. These are the slides from our friends at Co-op Cincy in Cincinnati, Ohio. The point is, it's a nationally important sector, and that's good in a sense because we have a lot to work with. This idea of starting a more cooperative economy is not new. It's been happening really effectively in a profound way across many sectors and all across the geography of North America. I want to share more about why I get excited about what co-ops can be. I describe co-ops as islands of common resources, similar to the way that the Catholic worker operates as an island of common resources in a way. And in that sense, they can be prefigurative. So prefigurative is a term that's helpful to describe the fact that even though the world is not as it should be yet, we have a chance in our own space to embody some of those values that we do want to see in the future. In that sense, we can prefigure the world as it should be right now. And I think co-ops are uniquely capable of creating a space where we can do that. Here are some of the ways they do that. One worker, one share, one vote. Of course, that's talking about a worker co-op where everybody who works as a worker co-op has a chance to become an owner and actually direct the big decisions that happen at that company. In a worker co-op, it's also common that pay scales are more compressed. So rather than 300 to 1, you might have 3 to 1. That's true in Mondragon, which is the largest worker co-op in the world. In northern Spain, I believe it's 8 to 1. Much more egalitarian, right? In that sense, it's prefiguring the world as I would like to see it, as the values that I'd like to see grow in the world. Another example is that when there's surplus, so when there's profit, it gets shared with the members. Again, it exists to serve the members. If the members are workers, it gets shared with the workers. If the members are consumers at a consumer co-op, it gets those surplus go to the consumers. Again, that's another example of wealth, can be an example of wealth redistribution. And then you can practice management in a democratic way. And outside of the walls of a co-op, you can practice solidarity. It sets you up well for practicing solidarity because it's grounded on these values. I want to be clear that co-ops alone are not enough. Co-ops are these islands. If they are these islands of common resources, they are not enough alone to transform our economic system and get to the world as it should be. And so, in fact, they must be linked. And they are much stronger when they're linked with a broader sense of struggle for economic justice. And that includes some of the most powerful expressions of a different power dynamic in our economic system, like the labor movement. So co-ops linked with the labor movement are the best version of co-ops, I'm going to say, the most powerful. That's true with organized faith communities as well. And many of you, if you're people of faith, understand the power of organized faith communities. Broader social movements in general, certainly international solidarity efforts. There's a long history of co-ops demonstrating the power of these links in the world, and something that is really essential that we keep a focus on. Okay, so let's zoom out one more time. The solidarity economy is this vision of a way to describe a transformed economic system, maybe one similar to the one you may have been able to imagine when we started today. So it's this idea of moving almost beyond capitalism and focusing on democratic control and a more democratic economic system. And the outcomes of that are clear in that there are goals before we design this economic system. And the goals are that everyone has their needs met and that human activity respects the limitations of the natural world. I don't need to tell you kind of the urgency of the mission of transforming our economic system. You probably know well that our economic system is not meeting either of these two fundamental goals at all right now. It is not meeting everyone's needs, and it is certainly not operating inside of the planetary boundaries. I could delineate that further. I don't have slides to do this, but I'm just going to mention, huge global inequality, a climate crisis, neo-colonial extraction from the global south to the global north. The share of income in America going to labor is declining, while the share of income going to capital is accelerating. This idea that there's a natural propensity for capital to always receive more income than labor is bearing out in accelerated timelines right now in our country, in our world. The racial wealth gap, is another clear example of the inequalities of our current system. The increase in deaths of despair. I didn't make slides for that because I think you probably know that story, and instead we're going to focus on what it takes to get out of that spiral. Here's why this is important. The solidarity economy dispels the idea that there is no alternative. Time and again, folks want to tell us that there is no alternative, that we've reached the end of history. Okay, the existence of the solidarity economy, both in theory and we'll see in practice, dispels that myth. And I think that's a really important point that gives me hope in the face of those extremely challenging and dire statistics and trends. And I will say that we need to promote, I feel impassioned, to promote this idea that in fact there is an alternative, because all around me I see folks, maybe even who have great values, feel stuck in this myth that there is no alternative. And a quick example, I live in Cleveland, Ohio. We have a young mayor, I'd say, progressive kind of reformer type. He can't stop giving money to billionaires. He can't do it because he really feels like there is no alternative. I'm extrapolating, I'm speculating, of course, but that's my analysis. And until we can give him and other folks who maybe even have their heart in the right place, the tools to not only believe that there is an alternative, but the tools to act on that, I fear that we are stuck on this, this rat race. And so a lot of what we're going to be doing today is I'm going to try to describe what some of those tools could look like and why there is a foundation we can build on to show that there is an alternative to our current economic system, and that it's called the solidarity economy. It goes by many names, so I encourage you not to get distracted. If you've heard other ways to describe this idea with similar values, new economy, democratic economy, regenerative economy, cooperative economy. So it goes by many names. What does it look like? I mean, first, it's this idea that there is a way to have a sustainable and equitable community control mechanism of the things that matter most in our world: work, food, housing, culture, and that there's a lot of organizational forms that can allow us to get there. And in that sense, a co-op is just one of those many organizational forms. But as you look at this production wheel, there's a value wheel, if you will, of the solidarity economy. You've got the various components of the economic system: surplus, allocation, production, exchange, transfer, consumption, use, and within them, many different tools that we can use to meet some of these values of the solidarity economy. So I'm going to focus on the co-ops, but there are a lot of other ways that we can promote these islands of common resources. And even the Catholic worker itself is not a co-op, but it is in fact an expression, I think, of the values of the solidarity economy. So as you look at this chart, you can see, it might be hard to see, it's kind of small, but you can see some things that you're familiar with and some things that we can dig into further. A little bit more about the solidarity economy. It's grounded on some clear values. So how do you know, right, when something's kind of in the solidarity economy framework versus outside? This is a bit of a checklist or a bit of a test that you can use. The presence of solidarity, equity, democracy, and sustainability. And solidarity is defined broadly here. This is a sense that, like, at the heart of what we need of our economic system is cooperation and mutualism, reciprocity, altruism. I'm thankful for Emily Kawano, by the way, who's done a lot of great thinking on this. She's got some great resource out in the world, and we very much lifted these slides from her. So many thanks. Equity suggests that we do not leave identity behind. We understand that identity is a core part of course, who we are, and that centering the disparities of how we experience the world based on identity is important. So we're striving for equity in all dimensions. Democracy isn't mostly we're operating in a one person, one vote world where folks actually have real autonomy and the institutions that serve them have real accountability. And that happens through democracy. And sustainability is another metric. This is just understanding that we as humans have an impact on the world. Our mission is to minimize that impact and actually feel attuned to the natural world that we are a part of. Pluralism is the fifth value, which is to say there's no one clear way to do this. It just needs to fit with these values. And I want to say, for those of you, yes, who are familiar with Sabbath economics, I imagine that's most or all of you, there is a lot of overlap here. So I want to spend some time. I will say I'm honored to be in the same space that Ched got to share a little while ago. I myself had a great experience meeting Ched with my partner Molly in California and then in Pennsylvania at some of these workshops that I'm grateful the Catholic Worker here in Cleveland suggested we attend. And Ched's work really helped me come back to understanding the scriptures that I grew up with in church in a new way that have helped me find them much more accessible, much more tangible. And I'm thankful for that in a lot of ways. So here's some of the overlaps that I see between Sabbath economics and the solidarity economy. It's this principle, right, that there is enough, right? My friend is a Catholic worker, helped me see that on one of my very first nights there. And that relates certainly to food, that relates to housing, that relates to land, and that relates to the emotional resources like love that we need to see those things through and to care for one another. It helped me understand that redistribution is actually a core message, that Jesus spends a lot of time helping folks understand the power of redistribution, and that is essential premise of certainly practicing the Sabbath, respecting the Sabbath, and that is also at the heart of what it means to operate these islands of common resources in the sense of redistribution. Again, that everyone has enough, and its counterpart, that no one has too much, that there is an explicit commitment to striving to build an equitable playing field, and that there's a real danger when we allow that top threshold to slip. Ched calls that affluenza, and this is a picture of his latest book that came out, I think, maybe just a year ago, which I recommend. I'll say I'm also a fan of the OG Sabbath Economics book, 2001. So I linked to that in the resources slide at the end. Great way to access what I think which can be a little bit dense, I think, because it's so theological, but a couple points of access, and encourage folks to learn more if you haven't already, though I suspect you probably have because you're on this call. And I want to, just a reminder here that this is not just an intellectual exercise. This is a deeply personal exercise. And as we unpack this stuff, either from a spiritual lens or from an economic lens, that often requires us to unpack some assumptions that we often carry on, that can relate to assumptions that we carry around class, assumptions that we carry around race, around gender, around meritocracy, around so many of what's woven into the assumptions of our dominant systems, that as we begin to tease out what Sabbath economics means for us, what solidarity economy, the pursuit of solidarity economy means for us, it also becomes a very personal experience. Couple more kind of systemic stuff before we get into some more personal and practical things. One thing is that even the solidarity economy, the co-ops make up part of the solidarity economy makes up part of what must be a movement for a transformed society. And you can sum that up in fighting the bad and building the good. I have a question for you, and I'm going to ask for some chat participation here. If you have participated in the last 6 months, if you have participated in a direct action, go ahead and type yes in the chat. So direct action could be like a protest, or a town hall, or even some direct action that's like a little more adversarial. Go ahead and just type yes. Yeah, I just want to see who's. Yeah. Okay, great. We're getting a real flood. So Donna, Brian, Chris, Kim, Meredith, Rebecca, Sam, Colin, Catherine, Mary Ellen. So Tara, thank you. Hudson, Mike, Mark, Molly. Yeah. So thank you all so much for that little exercise. We recognize that if you have done that, you recognize that fighting the bad is more than just long-term projects to build the good. We actually need both of those things. And so it's so important that we link those connections and find those connections, because the task ahead of us is so substantial that it is going to take politics and policy that's absolutely integral. It's going to take organizing and social movements, direct action. It's also going to take this long, slow work of building alternative institutions, which I think mostly what is the solidarity economy fits in. And at the heart of that, linking those things in this helpful image, again, from Emily Kawano, is culture and relationships. It's like what binds us together beyond the here and now. I very much believe that faith and faith communities, sit at the heart of this. And that's why this is a great topic for this group. Faith communities are one of the few places that we have both the respite for the personal reflection and growth that's necessary, and also the power that comes as we clearly stake out what is our culture, what do we believe, what's at the heart of our cultural relationships, and that ties together the work of building new institutions with the politics and policy and the organizing of social movements. Okay, y'all are making, thanks for sticking with me through this. We're going to get into some concrete stuff, but first I want to tell a little bit about my journey. So 3 pictures here. One is top left is me and my sister with my dad at church. The other is some of the women I worked with in the Dominican Republic when we started a cheese co-op. And at the bottom, this is the first time I've ever showed anybody this picture. This is my McKinsey class when I was in the corporate sector. So, okay, this tells a little bit of my arc, and I'd like to share a couple stories. One, I am thankful for the way that my parents primed me to value community. And that looked like being part of a faith community. When my parents met in college, they got saved as part of the Jesus movement in the 70s and absolutely committed their lives to building a new world. What that world looked like for them was building a new world grounded in faith and enabling folks to connect through a deep personal relationship with Jesus. So this is that in action. They raised my sisters and I in church. I think that, I was probably 4 or 5 at this age. I think that was probably the last time anybody let me sing on a microphone for a long time. That was for the best. But I was always around church for many years, and really understood and got to appreciate the power of community. And my parents are here tonight, so Mom and Dad, thank you so much for being here. I will say one of the first and clearest examples of abundance and the sense that there is always enough that I experience in my life has been the consistent support that my parents have shown me in many stages of life. And so I'm full of gratitude, Mom and Dad, for modeling that and for priming me, I think, to expect that it is possible to build a better world. And I'm grateful for your example in that sense. Another story happened when I was in Peace Corps. So when I was in my early 20s, finished college at the College of William and Mary in Virginia. I went to the Peace Corps in the Dominican Republic and started I lived in this dusty farming town. You can kind of get a sense for what it looked like as the only English speaker in the southwest corner of the country. And something that really changed my experiences there was when a group of women told me they wanted to start a cheese co-op. I had not worked with this group of women before. I did not know what a co-op was. I did love cheese, so they kind of sold me on that. And we spent the next year, sure enough, trying to start this cheese co-op. And the energy and the insight and really the passion that the women brought to this project was unlike anything I'd experienced in any of my other projects for the year that I'd been in this town. And so I recognized that they were on to something really important and that I wanted to be part of that journey. So sure enough, I worked with this group of women. We wrote a grant for the UN, funded us to buy all the ingredients and equipment that you need to make cheese. And we went to the one guy in town with a cow and we said, "Excuse me, sir, we'd like to buy all of your milk." We made some cheese and we started going door to door, and the women were really on fire. And I didn't put all these pieces together, but in retrospect, it was clear that the women were eager to have a space of their own, a space where they could write their own rules, a space where they could frankly get away from their husbands and their kids and have a chance to meet material need, to put food on the table. And that's, I think, why I saw them bring this tremendous energy to this work. And sure enough, for almost a year, we attacked that project with a lot of energy. Unfortunately, before I left, the project didn't succeed. Like the group basically had run out of money before they turned a profit, before they could sustain themselves. So despite the grant that helped them get started, they did not become a viable business. And in many ways, that felt to me like my first personal failure, professional failure. As in, I was committed to helping this group happen. I didn't have the tools for myself to bring, I thought, the knowledge and the wisdom that this group needed. And so that, taught me I needed to build those skills. It also taught me that there was this really powerful mechanism for enabling folks to bring their best selves, to bring their passion, to bring their insight. That was my introduction to the co-op, the world of co-ops. I'm grateful for the women I worked with in Kanoa. Got a chance to visit some in 2015 and 2018 when I returned, and always feel a special sense of home when I consider that really inviting community. Took a right turn here for a second after I finished grad school, where I studied public policy to look at how government and business interact. I decided, hey, this is a unique moment in my life. I have a chance to see capitalism up close, and if I want to spend the rest of my life finding a way to do it differently, I feel like that's worthwhile. I also wanted to pay back some student loans and travel. So sure enough, this is the most corporate-y picture of me I could find, a corporate retreat. And so I did that. So I did that eyes wide open. I promised myself that I would never hold it against anyone who disparaged that decision or who had trouble trusting someone who'd make that decision. I totally get it. And I think I went through it for a couple of years. I was in the Cleveland office and I worked on projects, some of which I feel okay about, some of which I don't feel great about. And sure enough, I got really close to, peak capitalism and began to understand what that looked like, and have since, in 2019, we started Cleveland. I've since been trying to apply some of those skills and the ways that I do think they are very effective operators, trying to apply some of those skills to the work of building co-ops and building a new economy. Still have a couple friends there. I admit it wasn't a place I really felt a lot of spaciousness or a sense of belonging, but life's full of surprises. Okay, so this picture brings me a lot more warmth. This is the group at Cleveland Homes. We just had our annual, or rather our first strategic planning meeting. About half these folks are on the staff, about half are on the board. And together we are trying to figure this out. We're trying to figure out how to bring forward practices, islands of common resources through co-ops of various kinds. So sure enough, this is a summary of our work. So I'll work through this for a little bit. This might take a little bit to figure out. Whoops, skipped ahead there. Now we're nearing the end here. Appreciate your patience. We're going to get to Q&A soon. So I invite you to start thinking of the questions that you've got or the reactions that you have. 3 big categories of work. We incubate and support cooperatives. We have a focus on one sector, which is the energy sector, and we call that work energy democracy. And then 3, we organize folks for economic democracy, which is a term we use in parallel to solidarity economy. So on the incubating co-op side, we support worker co-ops. We have a program called Co-op U, where people who have a new idea for a worker co-op go through a business planning process with us. We're also able to lend money through a national CDFI called Seed Commons. We've lent nearly more than $750,000 out. In fact, just last week, we got a new co-op in Columbus. There are 3 union electricians that want to start their own union electrical contracting company. And we've helped them for the past year get started. They just got approved for a $100,000 loan from this national CDFI. So that's an example of our cooperative workplaces work, very exciting. A second example is in the housing world, co-op housing. Affordable housing is a top concern, and that's true even in a place like Cleveland. So I know if you live outside of Cleveland, you likely hear it even more than we do, where traditionally our housing costs are low relative to the national market. Finding ways to build affordable housing that is stewarded by its residents, so it's a form of home ownership. That is, in many ways, it's at once the holy grail. It's also in many ways the most logical thing to do. And it's happening all over the country. It's not happening enough in Cleveland. It's not happening enough in those other places. There's a host of policies that can make that easier. We've got an eye on some of those. But mostly what we do is we work with groups of residents who want to buy the apartment building where they live in. And we provide technical assistance, and lending capacity to help them make that conversion. This is our newest program. So we're working now on starting our first conversion to resident ownership. There's a 27-unit building on the east side of Cleveland that has residents who are organizing and has a owner who is considering selling. We're really negotiating right now. It's actually very interesting. It's our first time doing something like that. And it takes a lot of technical support, quite a bit of coaching and handholding and learning from our perspective. So we're in that now. We've got a great team member who's focused on that. Our third example of co-ops is in the space between energy democracy and building co-op. It's Cleveland Solar Co-op, 110 member owners working to build Ohio's first community-owned solar array. I'm going to talk more about that in a second, so I'm not going to dwell on it now. We do some policy advocacy. The 110 member owners, once they're organized, they're plugged into what it means to build energy democracy projects. They are able to advocate for policies that support those kinds of developments. And so we've been effective at mobilizing folks. We could share some examples of our policy advocacy specifically around our energy democracy project. A third example of what we do is organizing people for economic democracy. A couple examples: People's Budget Cleveland, PB-CLE. This is a grassroots coalition that is working to bring participatory budgeting or people's budget to the city of Cleveland. In a people's budget, residents get to propose ideas themselves. They get to vet those ideas and ultimately decide among those ideas through a voting process which ideas they want to get funded. For more than 5 years, we've been part of a campaign to bring this to life. We're now working with a neighborhood, and I'm going to describe more about this in the next slide, so I'm not going to go into it right now either. And then there's a catch-all bucket of some community organizing. We do public education and advocacy campaigns and events. Just last week, we had 40 people at the Living Truth Center in East Cleveland, a church, to talk about energy democracy, to kind of plug folks in. About 10 folks at that meeting chose to join Cleveland Solar Co-op. So it's a sort of front door for the co-op movement. We're part of a statewide organization called the Ohio Worker Owner Network, and I spent all day in Akron with this group talking about some of the statewide policy that we want to do. So these are examples of the big picture of the work that we're doing at Cleveland Owns. Got one more slide and then we're actually done. So we're close. So again, get those questions ready, especially about some of this more technical stuff or any of the stuff we covered. I want to highlight 3 projects. I've mentioned them, but I want to go into more detail. Cleveland Solar Co-op, People's Budget Cleveland, and the Power Up Purchasing Co-op. So Cleveland Solar Co-op, 110 member owners working to build Ohio's first community-owned solar array. We have signed a power purchase agreement, which is a contract to lease the roof of a church in East Cleveland. That church is going to see the benefits of net metering, so their electric bill will go down, and they will make a commitment to pay us for every kilowatt hour that gets generated on their roof. The solar array is owned by the 110 member owners. And so in that sense, it's community owned. We believe it'll be the first of its kind in Ohio. Where we really want to go is like the group in Minnesota, Cooperative Energy Futures. They've taken this model, but times 1,000. They have 1,500 member owners. They've done $30 million worth of solar installations. And along the way, they've been advocating for effective policy that makes their job easier and makes it easier to grow this island of common resources, right? So that's even larger and more people are able to fit on the island and meet their needs through this model. We're just getting started out through Cleveland Solar Co-op, but I think given the urgency of the climate crisis, it feels very timely to see that project grow. It could be more timely if the policy environment, political environment were more accommodating, but here we are, and we think we still have a path to make progress on this in the interim. And we believe that when that policy does open up, we will be first in line to make sure that the model that gets promoted is not a corporate-owned model of renewable energy development, but instead a community-owned model. That's a long road, but we're starting down that path. The second is People's Budget Cleveland, PB-CLE. Right now we have a pilot in a specific neighborhood in Cleveland called Slavic Village. We raised $100,000 of private money to put into that neighborhood, and residents are designing the process through a 15-member steering committee. They're submitting ideas. We got 125 ideas. They're turning those ideas into proposals, which will go on a ballot. And then in June, we're going to invite every resident of Slavic Village who's high school age or above to actually get to vote and decide which of those ideas they want to fund. This is a way to imagine economic democracy extending out of the private sector into the common resources that get spent by the public sector in our world, in this case, in local government. At a time when voting rates are declining, at a time when people feel like our democratic institutions are declining, we think it's really important to demonstrate that voting once every 4 years is not the only way to practice democratic participation. In fact, just like we want to see democratic participation inside of our businesses, we want to see democratic participation to a greater extent inside of local government processes. So PB has a history of trying to bring that to the city level. We are now trying to do it at the neighborhood level because we got really close but didn't make it to the city. I'll tell you that story sometime. And we're excited to see this to life. And we're probably going to run a pilot 2.0, and we want to get public money in the mix. So it's not just a private philanthropic thing. It's actually a public, probably a public-private kind of thing. Excuse me. Okay, last one. And then I'm going to share resources and close. Power Up Purchasing Co-op. So far, 59 Ohio nonprofits have signed 140 contracts for the facilities management things that I mentioned: electric, gas, property insurance, copiers, waste hauling. This is all the stuff that's back of the house, right? And if you're part of a faith institution, you know that often that's the stuff that is not the, it's not the cool stuff you're talking about from the pulpit. It's often the stuff that gets relegated and invisibilized. And we actually see a huge organizing potential in that space. If you consider how much our institutions of faith, and if you add nonprofits, a much larger pool, how much those institutions are spending to keep those facilities going, it's in the tens of millions of dollars. Depends on how you draw the geography. But in Ohio, it's the hundreds, probably billions of dollars. We want to organize that spend. And it's happened before. CPA Co-op in DC has 200 plus nonprofits that together spend about $40 million a year to buy facilities management contracts through Power Up. Basically, Power Up and CPA, we run RFPs. Excuse me. So rather than a church secretary figuring out, am I getting the best possible deal for this waste hauling contract? That is almost an impossible question if you're a small shop. Instead, we're sort of call it a opt-in centralized procurement function that institutions can choose to participate in for spend areas that they want. There's no obligation. They can also choose to be the owners. So in this sense, it's democratic because the institution, the co-op itself, is owned by the member owners. Okay, these are concrete examples. I've talked for probably too long. I hope Brittany's not frantically waving for me to stop. Thanks for your patience. Here's a bunch of resources. I want to keep the conversation going. I'm excited to see what questions come up. But here's a bunch of stuff. I'm just going to narrate some of these things. Yeah, feel free to reach out to me. The only social media I'm on really is Blue Sky these days, for better or worse. Also, Cleveland Owns on Instagram. You can see stuff there. I've done a couple webinars that touch on how my own personal journey around finances has taken shape. And I've tried to align that with my values. I didn't focus on that today. Today I focus more on the co-op development side. But for me, those are really interwoven. Very much recommend the Sabbath Economics, great article here by Jason Hickel and Yanis Varoufakis from earlier this year. This article from Emily Kawano on the basic primer on the solidarity economy for those who want to learn more. A great podcast, a newsletter. Basically, I'm just throwing out some resources if you want to, get deeper on this. That probably starts with an email and a conversation. Happy to do that. And there's a lot of great stuff out there to get started. We have a lot to build on. And if we're going to grow this sense of what's possible by building these islands of common resources, we don't have to start from scratch. In fact, we have a long history of folks who've resisted the encroachment of enclosure and appropriation and dispossession, and who've instead carved out corners of the world. And it's our hope that as 1,000 flowers bloom, we're able to generate the momentum as the crises of our current economic system continue to accelerate, to see the momentum grow in this direction and ultimately begin to realize some of the visions that maybe you had at the beginning of a world transformed. So thanks so much for joining me today. Excited to see what questions come up.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Reminder to folks, please drop questions or comments or ideas in the chat. And we'll be answering those for the next 20 to 30 minutes. Diane here is asking, is Cleveland Own's lending policy structured to, address or mitigate or bridge racial disparity so that it is optimally aligned with solidarity as a value? Can you speak to that, Jonathan?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, the logic of mainstream lending makes it very difficult to get out of the inequality that's already baked into our system, right? In fact, mostly it just exacerbates and accentuates that inequality. And so, yes, we're working hard to do that. The way we do that is through the national CDFI I mentioned called Seed Commons, seedcommons.org. You can check out their work. They're doing great stuff. They lend exclusively to co-ops. They have a fund of about $70 million, and they're very intentional. We are very intentional as a member of Seed Commons about how we structure lending opportunities in a way that attempts to mitigate as much as possible the racial disparities that are already baked into our economic system. So a couple examples, no credit scores, no personal guarantees, and it's debt you repay only when you're profitable. In that sense, it functions more like equity, if you're familiar with some of the mechanics of lending, as in when there's upside, you pay it back to the lender, and when there's not, you're not obligated to pay. Now, you still are accumulating interest, and so at the heart of this model is still a business that is generating enough revenue to sustain itself. And that's a challenging path in a lot of ways. We think that this lending model attempts to mitigate some of the unfair advantages that access to generational wealth creates. It doesn't do a perfect job, but I'll say Seed Commons has a very good track record of not only making those loans that many banks would not make, but also providing the technical assistance to support entrepreneurs who are attempting to make those loans succeed. That's the work that Cleveland Owns do. So we provide the technical assistance here in Cleveland. We support 4 different co-ops. We've lent to 3 co-ops. There's a 4th on the way, and we support them in everything: budgeting, marketing, business planning, hiring, HR practices, business strategy, a whole host of ways to try to address exactly what you're suggesting.
Let's see here. Mary Ellen is asking about Co-op U. Is that specifically available to Cleveland citizens only? And if the answer is yes, do you have other suggestions on ways to find other incubators?
Yeah, thanks. Co-op U, yes, we are running that program in person. We've done an online version in the past, but we decided we want to do it in person. So anyone who can make the trip weekly or every other week, not necessarily Cleveland, Northeast Ohio is probably the most realistic. We've done online in the past. We might do it in the future. There are some online options. Start.coop is a good one. The U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops is another place where you can find some online co-op incubator programs. They're always happening. They're out there. And if you can't find any, I could help look.
Thanks. Similarly, Rebecca says, she wants to vote with her dollars. How does she find these like worker-owned producer co-ops so she can buy from them? She links here to one directory.
Yeah.
Wondering if there's more thorough resources out there.
Sure. Thanks, Rebecca.
So the directory she's looking at here is the National Cooperative Business Association.
Yeah.
Membership
Yeah,
list.
that's kind of the definitive list. I'm not familiar with that part of their website, but that is kind of the group. And I don't know of other. There almost certainly are other lists out there. I don't know where else to go to find them. But I'll say Equal Exchange is always a great place to short circuit that and buy gifts and other things. Yeah.
We have a question here from Ben. A few questions. I'll just read them to you. Is our society's class structure the main impediment to the realization of the solidarity economy? If so, what can we do to examine that? So he says, in other words, the current class structure benefits certain people who may not be eager to give up their powers. Cleveland Zones is challenging our materialistic selves, is it not?
Can sit with that for a little bit. Yeah. That really gets at the heart of it, Ben.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So for sure, class is something I almost never hear groups I work with talk about. I think it's one of the hardest sense of identity and relationship to the world for people to address. There's often a sense of shame. And that's for both class privileged folks as well as for people who have not experienced class privilege. And in that sense, it's really hard for us to talk about, Ben, which indicates that it's probably really important. So I agree with your premise that yes, it is one of the biggest impediments. There's a reason there's a whole school of economic and political theory focused on this question. And you also hint at power. I mean, sure, come on. There is a billionaire class that is committed to further entrenching its power and is willing to use any means necessary to do so. And that is a tough hill to fight. Certainly what we're trying to build at Cleveland Owns is an attempt to equilibrate the power equation. And that includes finding class traders, people who are willing to cut across their class background, particularly if they have a privileged background, and understand that applying the principles of Sabbath economics to the world require a different approach, a different relationship. So these are big picture answers, I hope, to a big picture question, but certainly worth more conversation, Ben. And does it become personal? It absolutely becomes personal. This work absolutely becomes personal. And that's one reason why this is a somatic journey. This is not just an intellectual journey. We're not going to think ourselves out of this. It's going to require a holistic understanding of who we are, what motivates us, how our physical bodies encapsulate some of the principles of colonialism that show up through today, through a through line from how our country started. So that's a process. That's another process. In particular, I would say also, in particular, I think white folks struggle with the sense of understanding the somatic experience that we have of living in a world of this sort of class dichotomy. And that's work that's worth digging into. And I'm on my own journey of that. And I'm inspired by the fact that this is a group that's also on that journey.
Thanks, Jonathan. Tara has a couple of technical questions. One about legal structures. She's wondering if Cleveland Owns uses cooperative legal structures or more mainstream. And she's speaking to specifically housing cooperatives that often need to be purchasable using Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac loans, and just kind of the complexity of that. How does Cleveland Owns approach the legal structure?
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, you're getting at something really important, which is that one of the reasons it's hard to see co-ops thrive is because there aren't services designed for them, right? Lending, banking, accounting, legal services are not designed with cooperation in mind. They're designed with profit in mind. The good news is those rules are in place because we put them there and we are able to change them. As it is, yes, in some ways we're fighting an uphill battle to use the more limited access to tools and resources that co-ops have to make those co-ops thrive. So a good example that you offered is, yes, can you incorporate a co-op under an LLC? An LLC is a much more common type of legal entity. And the answer is yes. You can, I think, achieve the co-op principles under an LLC. And so there's a great example in town. I think Rust Belt Riders, in fact, a worker co-op in Cleveland. They are an LLC that's owned by, at this point, 7, but have been owned by as many as 15 members in the past. In that sense, they're achieving some of the principles of cooperation. They're doing it under more traditional legal structures. We have to be creative and use a mixed match of more traditional legal structures to make that happen. The lending piece is critically important. One of the reasons we do what we do in Cleveland at Cleveland Owns is because, yes, we think nobody was doing it before us. Like we were bringing something new, as in this was a place where that access to those types of resources were limited. Access was limited. Seed Commons, I gave this example earlier, the CDFI, they have tools that work explicitly for co-ops, and they've designed it with that end in mind. I'm thankful for some of those new tools. We need a lot more of those tools. Housing is another great example. I have less experience with housing and how that intersects with the government's subsidy that comes through Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae for housing structures. We're going to cross those bridges very soon, Tara. I wonder if I could learn quite a bit from you about how to deal with those structures. Yeah, so thanks for that question.
Great. There's a couple of questions in here. One is about community land trusts and where they might be placed within the solidarity economy. And then Joel kind of piggybacked on that and said, asked about examples of congregations that partner in or with community land trusts. I know like that brings to
Uh-huh.
mind, I know groups of congregations of women religious that have done this often on the East Coast. What are your thoughts on that structure?
Yeah, yeah. Community land trusts are straight in the center of solidarity economy tools. A community land trust allows folks to designate land in a decommodified way and to use a democratic governance structure that ensures that both the people who use that land and the people who live near that land have a say in what happens to that. I think that's a beautiful example of the solidarity economy, one we very much support and want to see thrive. And of course, they cut against the logic of real estate capitalism, which is to maximize profit at all costs. And so as soon as you take the profit equation, as soon as you decenter profit, the appetite for mainstream institutions to be part of that decreases. So the examples of community land trusts that are thriving, Burlington has a huge community land trust, 2,000 units. There's a small example in Cleveland, Ohio, dozens of others across the state. A new one in Columbus. So these things, they are still happening. They're still popping up. Those are almost always long stories of struggle against mainstream economic, financial, and legal tools. And those are the islands of shared resources that we want to see grow.
Diane has another question that I think harkens back to your earlier part of your presentation about the UN grant you spoke about with the cheese cooperatives. She's asking if there are UN funds that can be sought for support of solidarity co-op development.
Thanks, Diane. Great question. Yes, at the time, this was 2010 or 2009, and we got a grant from the UNDP, which was operating a local chapter sort of in Barahona, in a city nearby where I lived in the Dominican Republic. It was a general sort of entrepreneur grant application. So the fact that we were structured as a co-op, I don't think was super consequential for them, but they liked the idea. And I don't know since then, what kind of lending programs the UN has to support co-ops. I will say the UN is co-op friendly. They declare October the month of the co-op. And as you might imagine, the idea of co-ops and of collective ownership and collective stewardship are more popular in countries other than the United States. So here in the US, we're a little bit behind, but it's a message that actually is more well received in the UN. Northern Italy has a huge, something like 40% of all GDP flows through cooperative ownership in Northern Italy, in Emilia-Romagna. Quebec, Korea, many parts of South America. So internationally, the UN is co-op friendly. I can't speak to the specific lending facilities that they have.
We have a great question here from Carissa. She asks if you can speak a little bit about how labor organizing intersects with or bolsters co-ops and the solidarity economy.
Thanks. Yeah, in like 2009, the United Steelworkers, USW, took a trip to Mondragon, and they visited this co-op in northern Spain, and they came back on fire for co-ops. It's really cool because in Mondragon, there's 70,000 worker owners, and they do not have a union. The workers own the places where they work. One person, one share, one vote. And USW said, this is the future. Like, this is what we need to create. So they actually seeded the money to build Co-op Cincy, our sister organization in Cincinnati. And ever since, the members of Co-op Cincy are also members of USW. And I just was speaking with them today. Their USW local, it has now a president, a secretary, and a treasurer, all of whom are part of Co-op Cincy. So there's this clear symbiosis between the way that the labor movement and the co-op movement can link. I mentioned Rose Electric, 3 union IBEW electricians in Columbus, Ohio, who are starting a co-op. They just got a loan from Seed Commons for $110,000. Huge opportunity, I believe, to overlap. A recent effort by the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops, Carissa, to deepen the connection between co-ops and the labor movement is a labor neutrality pledge that the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops is inviting both co-ops and co-op developers, like a nonprofit like Cleveland Owns, to commit to say that if our workers decide to join a union, we will not stop them. That's kind of the best position for an employer to take, which is I'm not pro-union. I'm not trying to get you to join a union because that can be shady. and I'm not trying to stop you from joining it. So labor neutrality. That's another way, a small step, Carissa, where there is national connection between solidarity in the co-op movement and the labor movement. And I think one of the best paths that I see for co-ops going mainstream and for this ideology of common resources going mainstream is through the labor movement. And I'm excited to find more ways to deepen that, Carissa. Thanks for all the kind words in the chat, y'all. Appreciate it.
Yeah, this is great. Could you speak a bit more, Jonathan, to the traits that define communities or groups that are ready to launch a successful co-op?
Yeah, starting a co-op's really hard. It's pretty much like it's starting a business. There's not a lot of difference there. And in that sense, for folks who are starting a co-op, the rates of success are not that different than the rates of success for people starting a traditional business. So it's really hard to do. And in fact, there's a debate in the co-op space of whether it makes sense to try to start new co-ops or whether it makes more sense to focus our effort on converting existing businesses into worker ownership. You may be familiar with this phrase, the silver tsunami. I'm seeing some silver hair on this call. I'm getting there soon enough. I'm not quite there, but silver hair on this call. Maybe you know that there's, every day, I think 10,000 baby boomers retire. Don't quote me on that. And with that, they are retiring with a huge amount of wealth, much of which is tied up in housing, of course, but also in businesses that are actively running. It's often not clear who's going to succeed those retiring owners. If their kids don't want the business, if there's no obvious seller. So there's a crisis of retention for businesses. And this is, you could think about this geographically. Many geographies are recognizing this crisis. And so they're building succession planning tools for existing owners. And one of those core tools is worker ownership. So when an exiting owner decides to sell the business to the workers, often folks who've been there for many years and are already operating the business. So there's a set of tools that are required, like traditional entrepreneurship tools that are required to get a co-op started. And there's perhaps a lower hanging fruit, set of tools, maybe a little bit more accessible set of tools for existing workers at businesses whose owners are retiring or just want to exit. I was just literally 2 hours ago at a reception for the Ohio Employee Ownership Center conference, which happens once a year in Akron, which is why I was down there. And I just sat across from a couple that own a resort on the shores of Lake Erie in Ashtabula County. They have 45 workers, so it's a successful hotel, bed and breakfast kind of thing. And they're 70 years old and they want to retire and they want to sell to the workers. So that's a great example of how some of what we need to do is instill and create the opportunity for owners like that who want to get out to understand that many of those tools already exist and they're already in-house. It's the workers who are there already. So on the startup side, a whole set of tools that are necessary. The bar is pretty high. On the exiting owner conversion side, a real opportunity to make sure that wealth doesn't leave the community or dissipate, but instead gets transferred to working class folks who can steward those assets together.
Great. There's one other question. I think we'll end with this one that I got back here. Another question from Tara. She's asking about whether it's possible, or asking if Cleveland Notes has adapted any of the financial structures of the billionaires, as she puts it. So like a real estate investment trust. Is there a way to adapt those existing structures, but bring them into the cooperative space?
Yeah, interesting. Yes, I think there is a way. I feel wary about some of those tools. And some of those tools I think absolutely are adaptable. Here's an example, a group called APs and Heritage. It's APIS ampersand Heritage. They've raised $60 million to buy businesses from exiting owners, like the scenario I just described, and convert them to worker ownership. That is basically how private equity works. You get this pool of money, You go out and buy a business, you shape the business around, and then you sell it. Now, APs and Heritage, I think, is doing it with good values, and I'm rooting for them. I want that model to work where you can kind of accelerate things and move things along more quickly, I think. Now, I have some reservations about exactly how they're doing it, but there are other ways that private equity is claiming to support this work that I am deeply distrustful of. KKR, of all people, the private equity firm KKR, which is known for, like, you know, the 80s corporate raider types, the 1980s corporate raiders. They are claiming to do worker ownership in a way that I think is very corrosive and damaging. They are acquiring businesses and flipping them around using all the traditional private equity tools, cutting jobs, outsourcing, stripping away employee benefits, and then they're selling the companies to the next private equity company usually, or the larger industry player. And they are sharing a portion of those proceeds with the workers. So that's meaningful. So workers get this $100,000 bonus or something, which is, hey, nobody's going to say no to that. But of course, KKR is taking the bulk of the pie. So that's a sense where there are tools, yes, that billionaires have used, like private equity, that I think we can modify and keep within our world of values. And there are some tools, and there need to be clear guardrails, and setting those guardrails without allowing folks to co-opt the language and values of this work is a real challenge. I'm not that close to this. We're really local. That's some national stuff, but it's something to be on guard for. In the real estate world, we're getting more into that. So you mentioned REITs. Yes, billionaires have used REITs to shelter their asset acquisitions and increases from taxes, basically. Great job if you can get it. Own a lot of stuff and pay very little taxes, and REITs have been one of the major vehicles that's happened in the real estate industry. And I don't know of an application where they've actually used a REIT in a co-op structure. I don't think I'm opposed to that ideologically. But you remember, like, the intention behind many of those vehicles is not to steward common resources, right? It's to extract as much value from working class folks and funnel wealth from the bottom to the top. And in that sense, we got to approach those tools eyes wide open and be very judicious. And that's a lot of homework that I haven't totally done. So I appreciate you asking the question, because it's a good one that we can do some more thinking about. Yep.
All right. Well, we'll wrap it up there. On behalf of Faith and Money Network, Jonathan, thank you so much for this time and your energy and your knowledge to share with all of us. We will be emailing a link to this recording to everyone, as well as I'm going to snag that resource list from you, Jonathan, that you shared on one of your last slides, and share that as well. Any parting words or any other recommendations to give to folks? Diane asks how people can find you.
Yeah, thanks. I will take a chance for a parting word. I'm feeling a lot of gratitude. Thanks for being here and for sticking with me for 90 minutes. Brittany, for holding the space, and for Faith and Money for the legacy that y'all have in holding the space. And yeah, I just want to say it's, I'm here because I really think a better world is possible. And there are sparks of that all around us, if you look, and sparks of that inside of us. And I'm grateful to be in a space where folks maybe share part of that vision. I'm looking forward to more. Thanks, y'all.
Wonderful. Thank you all for being here and for hanging on into your evening. Diane, we will share Jonathan's contact info via email with folks afterward.
I'll put my email.
He's going to type it in for you too.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you so much, all. Thanks, Kim.
Yeah, thanks for the encouragement. Appreciate it. Brittany, I don't know if you want to hang out and
I'm going to
Okay.
close this so we can close the recording and we'll hop back. Take care, everyone.